the 2022 class in the state of Kansas and the kids in the KC Metro in particular, where a lot of the frustrations are coming in right now. Carson Willich was one of the last that K-State lost to Iowa State. But you have like Caden Crawford, Landon Dean, other kids from the top 10 in the state of Kansas that K-State has missed out on. How big of a deal are the recruiting misses that are going on right now?
I mean, in terms of, I guess perception doesn't look great because it's just more of the same when it comes to local recruiting that doesn't necessarily feel a whole lot different than what it was prior to Chris Kleiman and that staff's arrival. So, but in general, I think that they recruit hands down much better than the previous regime, of course. But I don't know that they've really turned their corner locally yet. I know it's something that they want to do. I think they would admit that they haven't turned their corner locally. And I think that perception is probably perception more than anything, I would imagine, where the hit is, especially. And I think it's in a sense unfair to judge it based on this. But when, Chris Kleiman's introductory presser, he kind of hammered on how much he wanted to have success recruiting locally, and it just hasn't happened yet. And I think some of the frustrations probably date back to that statement in that introductory presser, which I tend to think is a little unfair. I think they're competing more. I mean, they were losing kids locally or any kids prior to their arrival for a far different reason that to me is a little bit more frustrating. Now you're competing with kids and you're actually in the mix with kids that you probably weren't really dreaming of landing before climb, and now you're competing. You just have to land them at a higher clip, so the close has to become more efficient. But I do think they scramble well, and they've already they missed on those couple linebackers, and now they're in on a few other linebackers that I like maybe just as much, if not more.
Well, taking it back to the quote on the press conference, to me that is stupid. Come on, people. It's an introductory press conference. You're going to say what you're going to say. You're going to need to say things like that at an intro presser. If you can get players, you can get players. And we've talked about this before. It doesn't matter where they come from, and they've been pretty good at doing the scramble drill when the first options don't go their way. And we saw it happen and play out almost exactly like this in the 2020 class in the state of Kansas. And they've still... the offensive line, for instance, was the place where people were really screaming at that point, and it was Turner Corcoran and Hayden Pauls and Alex Kahn from Derby. It was like those guys, and guess what? Right now, the offensive line feels about as stocked with young depth as any position on the roster right now, so they've still done a pretty good job, even missing out on those kids. But a lot of it is perception, and to me, the thing that really stings is for instance, losing Willich to Iowa State. I mean, it feels like Iowa State is beating them for a lot of prospects right now, and it makes sense. Iowa State is obviously the hotter program at the moment, and it's not particularly close, but that's the kind of thing that to me really strikes me with the most worry about what's going on, because there are only so many resources in the region, and Iowa State seems to be running circles right now around what K-State is doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think that's another layer to it. Like, who you lose to matters. Particularly if it's like that school where it's hard to envision Kansas State and Iowa State having a lot of success on the football field at the same time, right? Usually when one's good, the other one probably isn't. It's difficult for them to share success, just like you would imagine it would be difficult for Kansas State and Kansas in this era to share success. That's why, focusing on who Kansas may or may not hire a head coach probably matters. So I do understand that. Because if Iowa State and Kansas are both headed in the right direction, at least in terms of decision making and compiling a roster, then that's just another challenge that's in front of Kansas State that they have to defeat.
Derek Young talking with me from K-State Online. You can follow him on Twitter at @DeYoungRivals. I mean, the other thing that's really piled up here is K-State hit the pandemic. They had a Skylar Thompson injury that really thwarted what the season was going to be, and now they've been trying to recruit in a dead period during a pandemic, with a 4-win season being what they're selling right now. And that is very tough. And as we're starting to see the pandemic lift and everybody can see some hope and all of that, I think there's some hope to be gleaned from looking at the calendar and saying, okay, June 1st, things will open back up, no more dead period in recruiting, and K-State can finally get some guys back here on campus. How much will that help as soon as that happens?
I think that will help tremendously. Obviously, there's going to be the argument, you have that pushback from those that say, everyone's dealing with the pandemic, but I do think it probably adversely affects some schools more than others. Some schools really need to show off their campus. Unfortunately, you would think Iowa State would be one of those. It's a very similar program layout structure as Kansas State, but the problem is they are coming off of a Fiesta Bowl win, and Kansas State's coming off of a 4-win season, of which I think they lost like 5 in a row. They haven't won a game, not just since like December or November. I think their last win might have been in October, if I remember correctly. So it becomes a harder sell on that front. And getting kids on campus, the thing is, like, that's easier to build relationships too. It's going to help everyone, but it's probably more of a breath of fresh air for some programs than others. And I imagine that's probably pretty exponential in Manhattan.
Yeah, I think I will always stick to my point in case that does hurt K-State more than a lot of other places, in particular with the circumstances right now. At a certain point, you have to find your way through it, and you have to find a way to continue to get talent. I think, though, once they can get back out there on the field, hopefully Skylar stays healthy. Or, I mean, heck, with all the buzz surrounding Will Howard now, I mean, maybe even if they had to go down that road, it would still be much, much better this year. And by the end of the season, if you have a 7 or 8 win season, things are back up, it's more normal recruiting-wise. Like, it could really just be a 1-year bump in the road where K-State got hit with a bunch of very difficult circumstances. Is it fair to still make that case in total and as a whole and say, like, hey, that may have been really what happened here?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, not many teams lost their starting quarterback and were forced to play a true freshman based on 0 development time. So, I mean, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. I think it's fair to say, maybe this is a good way of putting it, that Kansas State probably navigated everything that they were dealt in COVID-19, probably not as effective as other places. Now, it might have been a little bit more challenging at times for them than what other schools had to, go through. But I would say, if we're going to have a fair criticism, I don't think you can say, they're just not very good at what they're doing. I think COVID-19 played a part in that. Yes, everyone had to deal with COVID-19, but like we said, there's probably some inequities in terms of how it affected programs, Kansas State being the one that it probably affected the most negatively. But I think it is fair to say they probably navigated it pretty poorly at times. And because I think they probably contributed to the whole locker room and the culture thing as well, that they really didn't have a handle on. And I will say that I talked about the development time there too. And this is more on the field type of stuff, not necessarily recruiting. When it comes to COVID-19, it eliminated basically all of summer workouts. I mean, they tried, but it was pretty interrupted on a number of different occasions, and they didn't have a spring ball at all. When you have basically, you're losing nearly 4 or 5 months of when development is, at the forefront of your football program. When you lose that, then you simply have to rely on talent a little bit more than development. In terms of the football calendar, who's that going to benefit? That's going to benefit the schools that already have, stockpiles of talents of 4 stars and 5 stars. So I think that's just another way that it adversely affected K-State.